Welcome to the Hidden Grid. Everyone today wants to launch a startup, but reality is that 90% of tech companies fail within the few years because they build features, not infrastructure. Today's guest is a man who has sat across the table from thousands of global founders and watched them succeed and fail in real time. Pravas Day has spent 10 years as an entrepreneur in residence at Google for Startups in London, curates the US India Blockchain Council, and is actively working to empower future ready tech ecosystem right here in India. Today, we decode the absolute core mechanics of building a scalable business, breaking through the venture capitalist game, and win the long game. Hello, Mr. Pravash. Welcome to the Hidden Grid.
Thank you.
So today we'll be discussing about what the startup ecosystem is and how people like Mr. Pravash are helping startups to grow from zero to one. So looking at your bio, it feels like you have lived three different lives. Like you moved to London and then you worked in UK startup industry and then you shifted to India and that to working in the deep technology. For person listening to this podcast, who is Pravas De and how did the journey actually begin?
Okay. So thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure to talking to you on this podcast. As you asked, I have lived three lives. So I consider this as my second skin, right? As you all know, Pravas, I am an entrepreneur as well as Web3 investor. I do not call myself a normal investor because I do not actually invest more on Web2 transactions at the moment. So I moved to UK in 2005 for my higher studies. I did my PG DBMS there, and then after I did a master's in Brunel University, I did an MBA. So during that time, I was working with Marks and Spencer but there is an entrepreneurial instinct is already there. Even before that, when I was in India, I started a business. It was a travel company, more of tour operators. We were buying in bulk from different companies, airlines, and we are selling to retail clients, making money and distributing to all the stakeholders. It was not pretty tech savvy at that time because I'm talking about 2005, but we actually created a very initial dashboard at that time and then also rolled it out as well. But when I reached UK and I did my MBA, at that time I realized the meaning of entrepreneurship, the building of a company. Uh, what are the things required, right, to build a team, building your first tech that can become your minimum viable product or a proof of concept, then pitching to different investors. So while doing my MBA, we started a club, society club, society club or entrepreneurial society, we call it. It's Brunel Entrepreneurship Society. So that was our first initial breakthrough. So because Brunel is one of the top engineering university, we were one of the recognized AMBA Association of MBAs. So we had students from different parts of the world. So it was more of bringing engineering students, art students, as well as business school students, building something out of that. So then every week we used to call entrepreneurs to our campus. They were giving various problem statements to us, and we were solving them. So that is how we started the monetization. By the end of doing MBA, everyone, when they were looking for placements, I had already started something with my friend. So it was more of a business consulting company, but giving consulting to enterprises. And we were looking at various MBA students who come from outside because it's not like fresh MBAs. They have already 3 to 7 years, 10 years experience. But obviously, going to Big Four is very difficult because you have to prove yourself or your skills as well as working experience in the UK. So that was an initial time where you actually collaborate with a lot of startups, with a few MSMEs as well, so that by the time you finish your degree, you have something with your own so that you can join the big company or else you can start something of your own. So that is how basically it started.
So you mentioned about Brunel University. As if you see today's generation, Gen Z is romanticizing dropping out and starting their own business. And what I believe is this advice is killing them. According to your experience, what do you think? Like, is it important for a founder to get a professional education or just start their own business?
I think yes, a founder should have a formal education. They should actually go to a college or go to the university, learn the basics, and then after build on top of that. So there are many college dropouts, even school dropouts I've seen in the UK because I was part of the startup Britain when I was in uni as well. And post that, I was a part of the Richard Branson Foundation, which was called as Virgin Pioneers. So I was one of the product from there itself. So I took a lot of mentorship from my seniors from Virgin Media Pioneers who actually helped me. So if you do not have a formal education, you just want to start, which is obviously if anybody has an idea, they can find a problem statement, build something on that, and then go and find customers. So that's a normal way of doing it. But I think if you have a formal education, you understand the logic, you understand how do you want to disrupt it. So that is why a lot of tech companies actually built massive businesses, because they have a strategy, they have a business model, they have a revenue model, they actually bring in people who are smarter than themselves. So that is what formal education brings in. The most important thing is while you are studying somewhere or being part of that network, the alumni networks also helps you, and that's something not possible without a formal education or without any support system, I would say.
So, is it true only for technology businesses or other businesses like FMCG?
Not necessarily, you can take any business, but the network is very very important. The reason I say it, even if say for example I don't have any education, I want to start, so what should I do? I just open a shop, right? But finding for the first customer or finding the 10 customers then they would like to pay me, that is one of the important. But if I already have a network, I can just send a cold email to everybody, or maybe just send a WhatsApp message to everybody, and those people can also forward it to their network. Then I got some leads from itself. And the second thing is the first validation of 10 or 100 people. So that they can actually you can generate that lead as one of your potential business demand, so the supply can be also mitigated accordingly. But if you don't have that kind of formal education, then it's very much like a trial and error method, and that takes a lot of time.
So, you talked about first 100 validations of your product. So, a student or a young entrepreneur listening to this podcast who is going to start this something of their own, so what is more important to them in terms of market research? Is it that they should look for the data on internet or talk to customer directly?
So to be very honest, when I started, I just took three blank papers. I spoke to the customers. I didn't even know if they are my customers or not. I just started doing that. It could be a market research, but we call it more empirical research. You go and talk to your customers part first, but at the same time, for finding a TAM, right, or a service obtainable market so you need to actually get also the secondary data, because if it's not an internet business, then obviously you have to directly go and talk to the directly customers, or that potential to anybody. There might be some customers, they will get converted out of that. But if it's an internet business, I would suggest better is do both, offline research as well as online research. Online research actually takes a lot of time because you do not meet them directly. It's up to them to respond or not. But while you are building offline, if you do that, I think that is also you get more confident and the pivot can happen quickly.
Okay. So you've spent like 10 years inside this Google startup in London as an entrepreneur in residence. And first, break down what the job actually was. And second, when you have front seat of hundreds of startups, you see them die in real time. So, what is the number one silent killer of early startups that founders never see coming?
So while I was building from my uni itself, and I see a lot of entrepreneurs simultaneously who are colleagues of mine or were friends. They were also building from other universities. So while when I joined Google, before that I also was part of a student organization called NACU. It's called National Association of College and University Entrepreneurs. So that trend was not there in the UK. So mostly either you get graduate, you've been working like 10, 11 years, 15 years, you have now some savings, and now you go back and start a business. So we are probably the first generation who started while we were in the uni. So, and we were all international students. So you were not allowed to start a business officially. You were only allowed to work 20 hours per week, and get a part-time job, get your studies over, and then get a job if you want to stay in the UK. So at that time, building something was always a risk. That's one point. The second thing is, there is a short-term vision. Like if I'm in uni, then I'm only there for 1 year, or the graduate students are there for 3 years. So what do you do after that? Because you don't have access to uni, you don't have access to the lab itself. So it means you have to somehow raise the money so that you can afford an office, or few employees, get all the compliances done. And that is where most of the startups fail, because they don't have that scalability option at the initial stage. Because it normally takes, anything you start, you need to give at least 1,000 days. So that if you do not have that bandwidth, or you do not have that funds with you, then it's pretty difficult that your business will die. So I think burning money initially is one of the silent killer, actually. So do as much as possible without spending money, or getting some collaborations done, so that at least you save as much as possible. Yeah.
So I've heard people saying that I don't have enough funds, that is why I'm not able to start something. So do you think that this is the only limiting factor, or a founder can even start when they have less amount of money?
Yeah, I mean, see, money is not only challenge. I mean, if you look at, so there was a program we developed when I was in uni. It was on innovation and entrepreneurship. So when our professor told us, we wrote down all the requirements to start a business or starting a startup. So money came almost on 23rd line. So before that, all the 22 items that you need doesn't actually require any money at all. So it is more of your time, your network, your idea, validating that idea with few people who can initially pay you. So there was a lot of challenges we did at uni time. We were throwing our wallets inside our dome and going without our wallets, or at the time mostly internet, the UPI and all these things are right now available. The cards connected with your smartphone, so that you can pay. Those things were not available at the time, so you have to carry the cash. So we were challenging ourselves not taking the wallet, so that from the dome, or from where we were staying, going to the university, getting your food, getting all the rest of the things done, and coming back home. So if that is a 12 hours or 13 hours, if you can survive without money, then you can survive the business. Now that gives you the trigger. How do you plan something? Now you know that you don't have money, you cannot pay, so the only thing is beg, borrow. That's the immediate. So you borrow from your friends, you ask someone from professor to take care of your food. It means you have to do some research for it, some work, because there is no freelance in the world, so you have to do something. So that gives you multiple skills developed, whether it's a negotiation skill, or going and pitching, the sales pitch, all those things actually you learn. And that doesn't require any money, and while doing that for a while, maybe 3 4 months, you become master of it. Now you can actually start something without money.
So was this exercise part of your curriculum, or you came up with this on your own?
Okay, so it was not completely part of my MBA, but I took entrepreneurship as a selective subject. And to be very honest, with my 1 year MBA, we were like 3 days going to classes, and I was not attending the 100% classes. I was going, doing my present, my attendance. Then after probably listening to 10-20 minutes, then I was so. From the first month itself, we actually started bidding for our academy, which is a club and restaurant. So and we require around 15,000 pounds to run that club. So I actually spoke to one of my friend who was from Mumbai, and I spoke to her husband so that he can actually invest in me, so that we both can own the restaurant. And he was a restaurateur earlier, so that we can offer food, drinks, and all these things, and we could build. So that was more like making money while you were actually studying. So that whole thing actually started from there. Then we used to create a group where other people can do the research, we can actually do a smart work, and then give the presentation. So we are balancing both things together.
So, what were your best memories of college that you still cherish and it helps you in your entrepreneurship journey?
Well, I wish I could go back now and I could redo the classes, redo the same thing what I did almost 13-14 years back, because now the time has changed. The new generation, particularly the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it's they are much more smarter, much more accessible. The network is pretty strong. So I think if I go to uni, I'm pretty sure the couple of ideas that I have, I can immediately introduce, get it started. Now I have access to funds as well, so I can do it better. At the time, probably it was too early for me as well.
That sounds like it's very different, the college life in London as compared to India.
It is, yeah.
Like in India, I've also taken courses, but we are never taught to, just do such innovative exercises or
Yeah.
anything.
No, even when we were in uni, so I was already working with Marks and Spencer, so I used to brought a lot of challenges in my soft floor with the employees, and inside the union we were solving it. We had a collaboration with Starbucks as well. They gave us problem statements. We had a collaboration with the British Research Cancer Research Foundation, so they gave us problem statements. um, so yeah, I mean there were a lot of companies. We worked with very closely with London City Airport, with the Virgin Airlines. So yeah, there were a lot of companies who would like the young approach, right? How the youngsters think.
So, if you have to tell, say, three lessons that you've learned throughout your journey in London and which has helped you in your career, what it would be?
The first was actually getting a job, because it was one of the very difficult thing when I mean it's a very difficult challenge as well when you go from India and get a job. So I earlier, before moving out of India, I did that research, and I was a Chelsea football club. Like I'm a football fan, so I had my seniors working with Chelsea, so I did that network earlier. So when I reached, I just dropped a message to them saying that I'm in London, I need a job. So they immediately say, okay, come and work with us. So that actually helped me immediately to start making money, because even if like at the time I think it was £1 was almost 80 rupees. So it's not like you don't require money, but if you have some extra money, you can spend on, you can do a lot of things. So that's one thing which I learned. The second is, while doing the job, it's a lot of interaction, because I've seen some of my friends, some of my colleagues, they do not talk to customers. They've been only done what the job was called them to do. But I was actually most of the time talking to the customer, understanding what they are looking for. And I was talking to my management as well. I did on while I was doing MBA. I remembered I did a complete research program from my company, which another consultant from US came and did it. Almost she took $2 million for that. So I did it completely free of cost. So it just because of the network, because of the contacts. And I the good thing is, why I also got the data, that mostly companies do not give their data to the employees, or even say for example at that time we were not even permanent employees. So it's very difficult. So getting that network done was one of the lessons. Third lesson was try to also create your own community, and that is something because while you are in the UK, you were studying and you were doing your work. It has a limitation. So we had a group which is called Indians in London. So it's a pretty like a extended family. So at that time Orkut was there. I don't know if you heard of Orkut, but yeah, Orkut was there. So we used to chat like late nights, and we used to have potluck parties. We used to play cricket, party. Used to have Bollywood nights. So yeah, having those kind of very casual, very flexible networking and stuff. That is one of the best
So
lessons.
networking is not only about professional networking. You should be able to network in social gathering as well.
Yeah, it's mostly those social networks actually help you when you need any support. But if you do formal network only, like say for example, if you're going to a seminar or maybe a conference and you're doing network, you only meet professionals there who are maybe from your industry. But then it's very short term because they also come from for an objective. You also going for an objective. If that those things meet each other, then you can create a relationship, but mostly the relationship starts from normal
So
social
it's
networks.
all about people skills. Like if you're meeting
Yeah,
people
yeah,
in social gathering,
yeah.
you will be creating a better rapport with them.
Well, I got my first funding, to be very honest, from one of my colleague from US, and he was studying with me. We were in a club and we were drinking. Just we came back to our suite, our MBA suite. We were just working on our research, and I showed him the back, the dashboard, the back end I created, and he showed, and he was the first initial. He was drunk, I was drunk, so he was like, you are sitting on a gold mine, but you don't know the worth of it. And hearing something that while you are doing MBA, then you were like, okay, what wrong I did? And he actually wrote a check the same night. And I thought maybe he was drunk, so I kept it on my bag and inside my bag. Next day morning, I went and I returned to it. I'm like, you are drunk. You gave me the check. You didn't know.
That's a very
So he
interesting
was like,
story.
it's a deal. I have already given you funds. We have already discussed the equity dilution. So it's a deal. So getting that money at that time, that 26,000 pound, it's a lot of money. I mean, being a student, if you have access that money, it's a good. So that was my first validation happened, and then after obviously I approached few institutional investors after that. So one investor gives the reference to another.
It's like if people believe in you, you would be able
Yes.
to like go above in your career.
Yeah, in the UK, I think it's a very much structured one because a lot of investors come because they are like early stage investors. So they want an exit maybe 3 years, 5 years. So they bring in the next investor with you if you have a good relationship with them. But in India, it works in a very different way. In India, also investors bring investors, but then you have to actually have a very different approach for that.
So what is like the biggest difference between these cultures of startups in India and UK?
I think in India, getting the friends and family round is pretty easy because maybe your dad already knows somebody, he knows somebody, then getting that funds is UK breaking that a ceiling or breaking that wall is pretty difficult. But once you have that, then I think then it's pretty much easy. And it's a very structured way of I think getting funds from there because if you even a school or college dropout, you get like 3,000 to 9,000 pounds, you can do whatever you want. And even if you say, I don't want to study, you have 9,000 pounds to do whatever. So at least your fee is done. And then the next is 25,000 pounds where the government helps if you want to start a business at a council level. So in that way, you have some secure of funds like to run the business for 5, 6 months. And then the institutional investment comes like 75,000 pound, 150,000. So it's a very structured round of investments you can raise, and then there is already a kind of database is already created, it's there, so you only reach out to those kind of investors. Your industry is pretty much fixed, so you know whom you want to network, where you want to build the relationships, and it's pretty. But in India it's still not very structured, so you have to हाथ पैर मारना पड़ेगा, like it's very much you have to do a lot of offline stuff
You
to
have
get
to
this.
like
Yeah.
make your own opportunities.
Yes, yes.
So, looking at your profile, you hold some massive titles like CEO of the Indian Blockchain Council and curator as at US India Blockchain Council. Let's lay foundations for our listeners. Tell us about these organizations, what your specific role is, and how your organization is practically helping to grow the entire tech and startup ecosystem in India.
So, US India Blockchain Council was started when I was already out of India. So, there was a breeze between the blockchain products that is getting created in the US or even in UK and bringing them to India. So one of the example was a cross-border payment gateway we were making in the UK first. It has US presence and obviously it was powered by blockchain or there was a crypto element to it. We wanted to launch that to India, so that is why we created India Blockchain Forum or India Blockchain Council. So I had two friends at that time. Right now, one is already working in crypto itself. He has created one of the largest, crypto exchange as well as a payment gateway for India right now. The second person who was there already in the UK, he is more into the peer group creation, and that is where we thought the blockchain would help us because of building smart contracts, then building the exchange so that the money can be transferred or money can be go from one person to another without any third party getting involved. Fourth was we are building a community already as part of Virgin Media Pioneers. So that is where the uh, blockchain council actually came into existence. So that is one part of it which is very much private blockchain. So anything that you are building for yourself can actually be valued at a technology stack. The second thing is once you have some permission blockchain, you're working with somebody, they're giving you funds or they are actually sharing with something with you so that you can take the consent of the people who are involved in the process. So if there is some mishap and happens afterwards, so now you have something to show that as it's a proof of concept or a proof of work. So that is where the blockchain council came in. Initially we were looking into golden triangle, so there was a lot of tech was already built in Silicon Valley. Then while I was in the UK, Silicon Roundabout was about to come, or we were working in that concept, which was East London getting evolved as a tech hub or a digital hub. And then you have Silicon Plateau, which is Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad, a lot of tech destinations who had a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders, or I would say even like the tech developers, builders, but they were not connected with the mainstream of tech ecosystem. So that is where we're trying to bring it together and call it as a golden silicon triangle, but the name was probably not sounding right for the western market as well as in India market, so we gave it name the US India Blockchain Council. We had three actually: UK India Business Council and the Indian Blockchain Council. Yeah.
And again, how this particular organization would help the entire startup industry to grow in India.
Okay, so there are three functionality or three proposed items were there. The category one was more of reaching out to colleges and universities, doing hackathons. So we initially started 36 hours hackathon. So anybody who has an idea, they can just come to the hackathon, build a prototype within 36 hours, get industry validated. That is one part. The second part was building an accelerator program which can be a cross border, so that if somebody is already building something in the UK and they need a co-founder from India, so they can actually get that things done. So that is like accelerator program, and it's like we used to do two cohorts in a year. So it's a 6 months, 6 months. For like two founder co-founder in the UK or US, one founder co-founder could be from India. So then that there is a joint consortiums getting created, and then it's an excellent approach. So it goes like from idea to validation, have a strategy, build a team, expand it or scale it cross border from day one or day three. Like that's what the objective was. So you can thinking about building a global business, not like a domain specific or industry specific or maybe country restricted business. So we call it business without borders. The third one and the most important one was getting funds. What we realized that in the UK US it was a very structured funding cycle, so you get the funds very quickly and then build. But in India it's very long term journey. So and India it's also experience, right? A lot of developers in India have experience how to build, but when it comes to monetization they do not have that access. So that is where we bring in the cross border experience, so that and the fund as well, so they can invest and grow faster, because obviously India was one of the largest populated country, huge market from the consumer side. So that was one point we created a fund of funds.
You also told me about the 8 weeks program of mentorship. So would you like to elaborate on that?
So that we started with defense. So we've been working right now almost five different industries for this. Defense, deep tech, Web3, any blockchain stacks getting built on backend. So that's one part. Women led is the next one, and then we're looking into some D2C brands as well, like healthcare, consumer tech, fintech. So we're looking that a mix of deep tech as well as D2C,
So what is the
direct to consumer.
process of getting into this program?
We have an application process. So actually, applicants apply for that. Then there is a group of mentors who actually go through those applications, look into it whether they are solving problems or not. Then, if they get convinced, they can directly accept and become a mentor. They can start the code. If they don't get convinced, then we have a kind of like Y Combinator. We also have an open discussion forum, so that the founders can come in. They can actually, it's a reverse pitching basically. So where the mentors come in, pitch, investors pitch, come and pitch, and the founders choose them, and then after they go and start building the cohort. So it's a 8 weeks program which takes care of all the elements of building a business or building a startup, strategy, finance, technology, building a product, getting it validated, then after all the compliances, your legal take, all those things taken care of. And the last edition was more of getting the funding as well. So that's a pitch where we have deal rooms.
Now I want to discuss more about the basics of startup. So there's a lot of terminology and it honestly confuses people. Like there could be an open local cafe, there could be person who is self-employed, a business, freelancing, a software company,
Yeah.
or a venture scale capital business. So what is the difference between them? Like what is startup? What is basic difference when you talk about a startup that is scalable, a business and someone who's self-employed?
Right. So someone who is a self-employed, or say for example, as you say, if somebody is starting like a kirana shop, right, or retail shop. So this is a traditional business. It has been learned over the years. Skills are already there. So he just want to have a lifestyle of his own. That is what the business is all about. So when you call startups, I think it's more of a repetition of business. So you basically build a system or you build a tech which can bring customers and again, and you don't have to do anything after that. So one is obviously building a system. Second is building a tech. Third is having a proper business model which can be pivoted, which can be validated, and it can run for a while. So you don't have to come every day, open the shop, you have to sell X number of hours, and then like close the shop and then go back. That's a very much like a traditional business. But when you build something like a tech business, so it runs 24/7. Whether you are sleeping, you are there, so it runs on its own, or you have a team which
And it's also like scalable. A business is scalable, but to a certain extent, but a startup can capture like the global market.
yes, yes.
And I've observed that there are 21-year, 22-year-old people looking at other people on Instagram and feeling behind, seeing that there are many people who are achieving so much in their life. From your experience, is entrepreneurship truly a young person's game, Or is there a massive advantage to working in a corporate job first and then taking the leap?
See, it's all about the problem statement you find. And the second thing is entrepreneurship is a kick. You never know when you want to start. So I started when I was pretty much, I didn't know at the time I was an entrepreneur or not, but I wanted to start a business when I was very young. I started when I was 17. So I didn't even know a lot of things when I was building my first travel company, when Yahoo chart was there and the MSN was there. We first created just a landing page. We didn't have even skills to build a website. But the business acumen was there. We always wanted to be building a business. I think the entrepreneurship word and the meaning of it, I realized that pretty when I was in the UK. So that was a transition, I would say. A lot of students who are right now starting looking at LinkedIn or Instagram, I think, see, there are two parts of it. If you already find a problem statement, you think you can work on it and have the bandwidth to basically build it, then you should go for it. Or else, I would suggest you first get some experience, because you can start on your own. But entrepreneurship is very very lonely business. It's only you who will probably wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, work till 9, 10 o'clock. You will have probably 4 5 hours sleeps. So everybody doesn't relate to you. Maybe your family doesn't will they don't relate to you. So sometimes at that time you need to find a community. And until and unless you have that experience, it is not going to be a long term success. Then you will somehow drop out there as well. You do something else. So it's better to start something, or learn from something, and do some corporate jobs, get some experience. Then after, think about starting that business. So you won't do the same mistake what a normal first time entrepreneur does.
So in India, our parents and our families, they run behind safety. And so a youngster finds it very difficult to start something new because
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is uncertain. So according to your experience, how do a young person starting a company overcome the criticism that they face because of their families?
See, I would suggest don't stay with your family. So and I could be wrong, because the family is the closest one. When you are off, they are the one who's going to support you. But seeing you every day burning your midnight oil, no family likes it. I mean, I think you probably taken all the entrepreneurs who have been very successful. Some point of their life, they have left home, they have lived on their own, struggled or made their hustle as much as possible, then they have built something. So it requires 100% focus. I think if you stay within the family, either you become part of their comfort zone, so you become part what they want, or else if you become a rebel and you want to start something of your own or becoming an entrepreneur, then you don't fit into that culture. So automatically somehow there is something happens, so that's not very long term. So better is you stay away, so you have that FOMO as well. Give what he's doing or what he's doing, let me help him if what is possible. And you can always go back. You make 10 mistakes, you fail, then you can go back to your family, say, okay, I've done this blunder, hands up, I'm okay to go and start a work tomorrow, and they will accept you. But if you're doing the same mistake inside the inside house, when you have three or four, in my case, like I had four brothers who were very successful in their jobs. I was the first generation entrepreneur. So for me, prove that I could be an entrepreneur is very difficult. So initially, that's why I worked. I made sure that I had some money, saved in the bank account, got that first proof of approval from my just elder brother who was in the UK. And then he's like, okay, it's your call right now. If you want to do it on your own, go for it. So, yeah.
So there are many business models in the market, like there is B2B, B2C, D2C. So how do someone choose what is the right business model for them before starting their actual business and burning cash?
I think, see, B2B is, it's not easy to close, because you have very limitation of customers. You are only selling to businesses or enterprises, whereas B2C is a mass market, and you need to a lot of funds to reach out to these guys. Initially, nobody is going to buy your product immediately when you are arriving in the market. Maybe you have to take 3 months, 6 months down the line, pivot it, look at different models. How do you reach out and then go? So there are a lot of brands who build D2C require massive funding, and they do not have that kind of fund, so they are automatically closed out. B2C could be experimented if you are building a tech business, and because now your internet is cheap, mobile network is cheap, so you can actually do massive disruption with WhatsApp API, or say for example build a website mobile application on AI and straight away rolled out for probably initially 1 million customers. So that's pretty much easy. B2B, you need a proper validation, you need a proper business model, you need a good number of non-executive directors or maybe advisors on your business, so they can become your ambassador, they can become your spokesperson. It's very difficult you as a founder and going everywhere, or maybe knocking all the corporates and saying, okay, buy my business. It's pretty difficult, because until and unless it is proven somebody else is using, they have given you testimonials, then it's very difficult.
So B2B is difficult. right?
B2B is definitely difficult. B2C is pretty like straightforward. If you are building a tech business, go for B2C. D2C, again, if you directly accessing to the consumers, then you need to have some funds. Otherwise, the conversion is going to take time.
And what about incubators and accelerators? Because I've seen people using these terms interchangeably. So, what is the actual difference, and when should a startup apply for accelerator or incubator?
So pre-incubation and incubation, when you have just at idea level and you need mentoring services, you need somebody to validate your idea. You are already building something. You need someone to look the what you are building and saying you, okay, don't do this, do that. That is more of an incubation model. Initially, first 3 months to 6 months should be part of an incubator. In India, the incubation means more of getting the grants, or more of getting the the institutional funding through the colleges or universities. Whereas the incubation should be more of a grooming ground for entrepreneurship and somebody building a product. So the incubation brings in brings all the mentors, brings all the services. So be it a CA, be the CS, or maybe somebody from the legal team, somebody from a finance team, somebody from the bank, so they could help to this person quickly get into the MVP round. And once you have a minimum viable product, you have some customer, I think you should go to the next, which is more an accelerator thing, where you need, along with funding, you also need cross border access. And that is where a lot of compliances come into picture, because initially nobody asks, okay, why did you make this glass, who is going to use it? So it's an initial stage, people like it, don't like it, they will buy it or they don't buy it. But once you reach to their a point where you need packaging, you need actually brand, you need logo, you need the compliance, like the intellectual property part of it. And that is where the accelerator actually helps you to basically protect your idea, because now a lot of you suddenly got a lot of attention. So, and the second thing is building a business opportunity wherever it is required. So some say for example cross border, or maybe you want to launch to another, maybe just one city, and now you want to do it 10 cities. So you need to build a team, you need bigger ecosystem. So then I think the accelerator helps there.
And how it is different from VC funding or angel investing?
So funding is a complete different mechanism altogether. Like VCs, angels, family offices, they come from the fund side. So mostly incubators and accelerators are now connected to VCs and angels, so that they can give that service, not as a brokerage but more as a support system. But I think that in a way that's a different platform altogether, and they do not come to incubation centers and say, okay, we will invest directly with you if we like your idea. Because for them this is also a kind of hunting place, or they actually start putting their money, because end of the day they are also there doing a venture capital fund or running a fund, because they also take other people, other investors money and then give it to someone, so they need to make money. So this is more like a launch pad for them.
So, what are the criteria that a investor would look for in a startup before investing?
I think scalability is the one every investors look into. Second is the TAM, the market size. Third is what is the founder skin in the game. Have they already invested anything? Is it just the idea that they were banking on? Is there a customer who are already paying? So all those things require from the investor side to before investing. So there is a checklist of around 18 different documents that the investors look into, right from the founder co-founder agreement to shareholders agreement to companies, whether it's a private limited company, sole trader, partnership. So all those compliances come into picture. If you are in FMCG or product, then the product certification, all those things that the investors want to protect from the business side of it.
And if we keep these criteria aside, these people are looking for human beings at the end of the day. So, what are the personality traits that would make them think that this person is winner and I want to bet on them?
I would say, like, so far, the kind of investors I have met or raised the money or I've been discussing with them on a regular basis, it's more of never give up, give, the attitude. Because entrepreneurship is a very different lifestyle. It doesn't matter. It's like, वो शेर के मुंह पे एक बार खून लग गया, तो you do not leave that, right? So it is always you go back. So entrepreneurship is like that kind of thing. You do a good job, you get a money, and then after 4 years, 5 years, you get used to, you get bored, you get a new job. But entrepreneurship, you do the same thing again and again. You just want to make that improvement every day, and get more customers. So investors actually look that kind of killer instinct who doesn't want to give up whatever the condition. Second thing is investors also want who can build a team, because mostly what happens, if you're doing a job, you are doing on your own, or maybe you are a team. But investors always look for entrepreneurs who actually build a team which the business can run without them, because they want the founders to be free so that they can pitch to the next investment or taking that business to the next level. So basically, the whatever they invest, they can exit 10x, 15x, 20x, whatever they are looking for. So they're basically betting on those horses. So they look from that side.
So, what is the most common reason that these startups do not get funding? Where they screw up? What are the problems or the communication gaps that these founders face?
I think understanding when to pitch to investors, when not to pitch, because I see a lot of startup ideas, or a lot of now entrepreneurs, or I would say aspiring founders, they are pitching to investor at a very wrong time. They do not have a proper deck, they do not have financials, they do not have a proper minimum viable product that been tested, but they're pitching to investors. It's all right as long as you are building a network, but the moment you start pitching to investor, it's a very close circle. It's get immediately sparked to other people as well. Because say for example, if you or I pitch an idea to you, and you have a friend whom you want to talk, before you invest even 1 rupee with me or in my company, you will definitely ask another two people. So my idea now got to three people. So if I'm not ready, if I'm not taken any business, and two other people say, okay, they're not matured enough, they don't have a good market segment, there is some negativity going on, there are some propaganda, some things happening, so don't invest, then that is a killer. So once that deals doesn't close, then it's very difficult to get the next round of funding. So I would say, wait for the right time, and then after start pitching, and create probably your market where investors, if they want to talk to five of your customers, they can just ring them, and the customers will say, okay, it's a good business, put the money. And that is where the confidence comes in for investors.
So some founders they're incredible from taking company from 0 to 1, but it takes entirely different skill set to take it from 1 to 10. So what do you think is the psychological blind spot that stops a smart founder from becoming a CEO?
Build a team right from the day one. That is one. I mean, even if you are working on idea, start sharing with 5 or 6 people. Find the spark who are actually aligned with you. Give them the responsibility. Start you being out of that business making or business building zone altogether, because the moment you get in, and that's the psychology I have, because my first business was not successful as well, so I realized it pretty soon, because the moment you are inside the business, um, then it is very difficult to get out from that zone, because in psychologically that's your baby, you want to build it. So whether it's a good business model, bad business model, but you love it, but the moment you see from outside the business, then you can see where which direction the business is going. You can listen to 10 other people, but if you are in that business already working day in day out, so you are burning everything, and suddenly you realize, oh, I have not actually looked into it. So that is one of the smartest way. Second is, find the team who are better than you, or complement, who can give complimentary, or who can actually build something which you do not want to, so that they bring in those kind of skill sets that can help you to scale in a very different direction, because a business has a certain period where you start from zero, then it increases, then it reaches to a saturation point. And if you know that scale, and then after, if you do not know how to scale it up after that, then automatically the business will. So if you have 3 4 other people who are already part of the business from zero, day zero, so now they can probably take over, or they can maybe replace you and take the business to a different direction, so you can take an exit and you can do something else.
So before a founder cold emails investors or pitch, what is the bare minimum homework they must do?
I think know your product first. That is most important and very very need of the hour. Second thing is also the pricing, because the negotiation you do with anybody to sell your product or your services, they should be in a position to pay. So if you are sending in cold email, I think be specific what you are looking for. If it's just a product which needs to be sample given, and you need feedback, so be specific for it. Ki, I am looking for the feedback. If you like it, then you may use it and you may pay it. If you do not like, I'm okay to take the positive feedback. But if you're selling it for a pricing, then be very specific. Ki, this is what I am looking for. So I think that gives clarity for front person who is actually reading the email, or the cold email, or same time when I'm sending it as well. So if I send to, like, with the current email marketing, if you send it to maybe 1,000 people, only 3 or 4% people actually open it. So very particularly 0.1%, 0.2% per the conversion will happen. So already behind, okay, this is what the market I'm targeting, or the sample size is.
So according to you, who is an entrepreneur, and can everybody be an entrepreneur, or is it game for only a few people?
I don't think everybody can be an entrepreneur, because everybody doesn't have that risk appetite. So they cannot take that risk when they were actually off, or they cannot perform in that time. So entrepreneur is something who looks at the problems or challenges and finds an opportunity. But other people start complaining about it, कि ये नहीं हुआ, this is not happening. They start about complaining, but entrepreneurs finds its own way and get that opportunity. um, Third is entrepreneur is always outgoing and always looking for other opportunities while he is building something of his own as well. But other people actually want to, okay, I've got this job, now I will work probably 5 years, 10 years, then I will get an increment and then move to the next. But it's very different for an entrepreneur.
So every startup book says that solve a problem. But if you are, say, 21-year-old college student, your only real problem are grades and attendance because you really do not have any experience. You don't know what is happening in hospitals. You don't know what is happening in logistic companies. So how does a young guy with zero industry exposure actually discovers a deep, high value problem that is worth solving?
So that is where I would say ki, find a job, start working with someone, right? Or maybe if your immediate family have a business, start working with them free. Make Excel sheets, start writing emails, start looking into their business model if you can bring any value in that. Or else find a friend or friend of friends, start getting recommendations. Initially don't look for money, because when I started, I worked with a lot of people without even taking any single penny, but that gave me a lot of experience, lot of access to the information, access to their meeting rooms, access to sitting with their, sometimes even also their customers. And that gave me a lot of confidence. Okay, now if I want to start, I have 10 people I can call, and I can ask them, okay, give me the validation, give me the feedback. If I need something, then I can immediately talk to you. So I think students need to do that first. And if you want to start a business when you have nothing or a zero experience, start something when you are in university, because it's one of the largest student community you have. Start something like a event management, start something like making an hospitality, or something like a community building. Those you don't need money there, you need only student supports. And then you can build something like into sports industry, something you like, maybe supplying, because I've been to now a lot of colleges and university in their business plan competitions, in hackathons. I see students building products which is very very high funda network, high funda technology, but they don't have access to it. So I would say key stay away from there. Do something which is very close to your heart and you experience it.
So, what is the one major thing about the startup world that turned out to be myth?
Um, it's more of, I would say, and I don't want to say this in public forum, but a lot of people actually start a startup because they just want to write CEO on LinkedIn, or they are founder on LinkedIn, and they start actually pitching that to for their next job. So I've seen this a lot. I mean, that is something I really hate, because the moment you write that I'm a CEO of this company, or maybe a founder, maybe a startup founder, right, and you go for a job, yes, the person sitting other side of the table wants to hire you, but then he also looking for few skills that is required for that particular job. And he knows that somehow down the line, 3 months, 6 months, you are not going to stay there, you will leave that particular job and you will start something of your own. And so that's a very much like deal killer, I would say. So that's probably one of the myth. The second thing is, a lot of startups or founders, they have one or two best skills, others they need to collaborate. But I sorry to say this, but now sit in a kind of an investor side as well, and I see those things. They think, okay, they have done everything that is right, and the investors are the one who are actually not giving the funds, but that's not right. So that's another one. Policy level, I think, yeah, it requires a lot of changes. So that's one more myth, I would say.
So, how do you personally separate your self worth from the performance of your company? Because many founders, if they fail in a business, they think that they have failed in life. They're not able to differentiate between company and their own self worth. So, how do you do that?
So keep your time for winding up yourself. Whenever you have got time, have that personal space of your me time on your own. While building business, build it like a Monday to Friday. I know entrepreneurs work 24/7, which is need to be, but at the same time have that difference. And I think also have few mentors if possible, right from the day one, so that they are the one who actually comes back to you and says, okay, you are not doing this right, you should do like that. And somebody you can directly speak to, doesn't matter whatever the time or day, night, whatever, but you can directly speak to and let them know, okay, this is what I'm doing, whether it's right or wrong. Can you give me a very kind of open ended or maybe, open feedback to me?
So many founders, they fell in love with their idea or product, and then they keep burning cash. Sometimes they should just stop the business or pivot. So as an investor and mentor, how do you break through the ego of these stubborn founders and make them realize that they need to pivot or kill this idea immediately?
Well, I have a golden rule. Whatever the business ideas come into mind, it's like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, 360 days. So that's like kind of my breakdown. Initially, I try to build the prototype or even the skeleton part of it in 36 hours. And then I send it to probably 10 or 15 people initially to get their feedback, who is my close circle, inner circle basically. And if I, out of 15, 11 said, okay, Pravas, this is a great idea, start working on it or find somebody who can work on it. So then I go for the next stage and start building a website, building a prototype that I can send to maybe 100 people. So that is my like 30 days cross deadline, and I spend very very little money. Try to find interns, try to find other people who can come and work with me. I do not mind even giving away the equity to them to come and work with me. So first 30 days I do not actually spend any money whatsoever to get the idea well. But that 30 days to 60 days and 90 days, now we have something which is very much a framework is now done. So okay, now I am probably doing the CTO, somebody is looking at the finance part, somebody looking at strategy. So we go out and build that market validation, market research and validation. So that's like a 60 days pivot you have done. 90 days clear of your goals and everything. And then after like 180 days, if it is crosses that, then now you have a chance of getting even 10% success. So then you go and build it for 180 days with a different, start looking into branching out.
Suppose I do not know anything about business or startup world. According to you, what are the three books that I must read to get the basics right?
So I have, so one is Let's Do It, Screw It, Let's Do It. So that's from Richard Branson. Um, I am forgetting the name of the book. It's actually written by Steve Jobs. It's related to innovation, thinking out loud, something like that. And there was one by Ravin Sharma, How to Solve Your Ferrari. So that's like gives you a lot of sales marketing. And Peter Drucker is also marketing. That's one more book you can read.
So right now there is absolute madness in the tech world. Everyone who builds a UI on ChatGPT's API and calls it a AI business. So according to you, what kind of AI tech will actually survive this market?
See, I think OpenAI right now, ChatGPT, it's helping to basically build a prototype faster. So that's a point of validation, I would say. But if you are looking really to solve problems, any industry, I think it's healthcare, fintech, or whatever. Uh, the finding the challenge and the solutions you are making, and until and unless people are buying it, then whatever you built on AI, it's not going to be scale for a particular time, because somebody needs to, like, even if I'm building something in AI, so who is my customer? Somebody who has a smartphone, somebody who has internet, who can use X number of hours data, and then I can get the feedback. So if the customer doesn't have that access, so what's the point of me building something on AI? So rather I would build maybe 3-page website which have a dashboard and go and validate that with the customer. And if I say, okay, like now this is what required for the AI to basically use the data and build a layer 1 L1 LLM on top of that, now I can go and build that, because now I'm looking for scalability.
So it's like first validate your idea, find a real problem, and then build the company.
I think find the problem that's that's the first thing you need. And build a solution which can be very simple, very straightforward, can be told to other people in maybe less than a minute, and they get it. Okay, this is what the solution is. Now how do you provide that solution to the person? Is now you should look into, okay, I will reach out this person offline, I'll reach out this person by email, by by social media and stuff, and I will do maybe 3 4 different kinds of advertisement to reach out to this person. So these are very much like the distribution models.
आपको ज़्यादा बेटर कहाँ पे लगता है बिजनेस करना, इंडिया में या यूके में?
आई थिंक यूके में ये बहुत स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड है, मतलब देर इज नो एम्बिग्विटी देयर. इंडिया में इट्स टेक्स अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम, एंड ऑन द फ्रंट साइड यू ऑल्सो फील लाइक, आई थिंक यूके में मैंने ये एक चीज़ देखा है कि इफ दे वांट टू बाय दे विल से यस, इफ दे डोंट वांट टू बाय दे विल से सॉरी, we're not
But
interested.
India में it's like they won't say yes, they won't say no.
They won't say no. The problem in India is they won't say no. They will say, always say yes, I will see today, tomorrow, and then
And they will not.
they will not reply. They will block you. They will do something. So I would rather say कि भाई say no.
Why do you
Forget
think
about.
they do that? I mean,
It's just the, I think the culture we have here is.
So, is there any case study of a founder that completely blew your mind, which you think was very impressive?
Well, I mean, so my, I would say when I was thinking about entrepreneurship, I was already looking at Richard Branson's journey. So for me, like any cricketer, Sachin Tendulkar is the god. For me, entrepreneurship means Richard Branson is the god. So that's how I get my inspiration. And every day, sometimes I say, okay, now it's enough is enough, I will switch. I go back, read his 10 tweets, I'm done, I'm again recharged. So that is what like gives me the dopamine, or the pill, or motivation for me. What I found is that a lot of entrepreneurs in UK or in USA, for example, and Elon Musk, right? And I look at his sometimes business model, great guy, great thought, very clarity what he wants to do, and he basically goes out and does it. Doesn't matter, he has to change the political scenario, he has to get big borrow from investors, he has to do whatever, but he does it, and he proves that against any odds entrepreneurship can be, and the products can be built. So that's like the second. A lot of Indian entrepreneurs now, I've been looking at their case. Ritesh Agarwal Voyarums, I've seen the growth when he started from zero. Now it's a massive scale I see, and when I see the kind of journey he has, it gives a lot of inspiration to me. I look at Zomato, like Dipender. When I saw his journey, coming from a very small town, now his worldwide success, that gives a huge case study to look into. I think, Ratan Tata, I've seen him very close because I was staying in Kolaba and he was very close by. So I've seen his journey, the way he comes and scales, and the kind of empathy he has for business. That's a different case study altogether. So yeah, many examples.
So you could have built like a easy SaaS tool and made millions. Instead, you chose to came back into India and get into defense technology. Well, defense technology is brutal. The sales cycle is so long, and then technology itself is so complicated. Why did you get into dev tech?
Okay, so it is a kind of home calling because 2002 3, I when I gave my CDS, I wanted to join the defense. That was my initial call. I couldn't complete my CDS program and stuff, so I went to UK. So it is like 18 years post karma brings me back what I wanted to do. Second is the growth of defense in India, and when you look at outside, it's pretty saturated. There, the products are pretty much saturated. uh, Defense as a service over there is also very limited option. While you look at India, we still at a very early stage. If I'm talking about defense as a tech or defense as a service, there are a lot of innovation requires in each and every item. And the reason I'm saying it, because India last 70 years almost, India was importing everything in defense. Now last 4 5 years India is manufacturing. India is building cross-border bridges in terms of defense, whether defense as a service or defense as a product, right? From drones, UAVs, missiles, combat jackets, everything that you see in India is now getting manufactured in India and now selling outside. So we have already created a great export market. So the TAM is quite high right now, or it's growing day by day. What I believe is, uh, for India coming back is also another mode for me was China. So while I was doing everything in UK, 80% stops were coming from China. So at that time, the business between, or the trust between China and United Kingdom was pretty much falling. So for me, it was a strategic move. If I'll go back to India, and this is what is the current scenario, because I have already someone from family who is working in Indian Army, so I understand the defense, TAM defense market, what is happening. And then I realized if I'll go back and maybe streamline and bring my last experiences, the retail experience I had with MNS, then my tech experience I had with Google, the fintech cross-border, payment gateway business that I have with the TransferWise. So all those things, if I'll combine it together and build something, then it will be scalable in next 5 10 years. So I'm looking at Indian defense ecosystem probably till 2047 or 2050. It will grow like at least double digit every year on year. And we're just actually touching right now 108, 109 countries export. So, and the Raksha Mantri ji want to at least, 36, 37x growth. So that means everything is going to get manufactured in India. So if you are in defense product, this is the best time to come back to India and start.
So defense itself is a very closed market. It's very difficult to identify problem because
Yeah,
a normal person don't doesn't know what is happening.
absolutely.
So if someone wants to start their own dev tech startup, how can they approach and what is the stepwise guide they can follow?
I think the problem statements are out there in public, through the IDEX, through Ministry of Defense, the DAP policy we have right now. One is getting the problem statement at a very 36,000 feet high. Now you can get it through IDEX and other. If you want to actually have the real solutions or real what is the challenge, I think go and spend some time at different cantonments, different locations. So I also spent some time in Assam, like the border areas where when I was kid, I was spending some time while different borders while my brother was serving. So getting access to that location and also start speaking to officers who have been already served for last 10, 11 years or 20 years, 30 years in armed forces, and they will exactly tell you "Ki, okay, this is what the problem I faced, this is what now changed, but if you bring the technology or bring the change business model, then this can happen probably next 10 years." And then build on that, go back and test it on different trial areas, on test pads, the basically test beds, and then build a scalability from there. So that's one of the way. It was a little bit probably easy for me because I already had access, and I started the defense launchpad with two other retired colonels. So I had direct access to talk, and then we every day spend almost like 6 7 hours just talking about the problems, just talking about ki jawan ko kya problem hai, what is the officers facing, or what their wives facing, what's their family facing, what kind of challenge India has at a policy level. So yeah, so those kind of ideas bouncing back actually helps.
If you had to start over today with zero capital, zero network, but all your current knowledge, Give us example of which industry you would disrupt first and what would be your day one move like.
So I think I've already kind of started building that. So the new product that I'm working is Global Bharat Fund, which I wanted to start it almost since 2011-12. I was thinking about it, but the market was not right at that time. With zero capital, I think the fintech or the financial technology market in India needs to be disrupted. There's a lot of works has been done. The UPI is a great example. So we already have a framework. We already have a technology which has been proven. Now we need to build something which is circular economy on top of that, or inclusive economy, so that we currently do not see what is beyond India, and that's the market which needs to be connected to India. So we have around 26 million NRIs stay outside India. They want to connect with India. They want to bring money to India. They want to invest in projects. They want whatever the hard work they are doing there and whatever the percentage they are saving there, they want a good ROI with transparency. So if India can build that and prove to the world, which is Modi is also trying to address that through different channels. But if that FDI, FII can be institutionalized in India, I think that would be a killer. And that's something I'm looking forward at least for next 12 to 15 years.
What would be your one piece of advice to Gen Z watching this podcast who wants to start their own startup or business?
I think, start something at the school level, because honestly, there is nothing to lose for at least while you are in school, college, or university, because you are already pursuing education, you are already doing something which can build your career. At the same time, take the experience, build something. Even if you fail, at least try to fail two, three times, but the learning is going to be different, and that if you can utilize when you are 20, 21, or 23, and start with a bigger scale, I think that would be great. There are a lot of distraction right now because of social media, and that is where I see a lot of changes getting attracted to. It's not going to be monetized at a large scale. Yes, you can make maybe a lakh rupees or 2 lakh rupees to make it survival, but that's not going to because the data the companies are now generating from the changes us, we could build bigger chunk of it by building an indigenous business model out of it. And I think stay away from the distractions, focus on things. That's the advice I can give, or suggestions I can give.
So, say a middle class person who doesn't have access to capital or network wants to start the business and have aspiration of becoming a billionaire. What should they do? Should they do a cash flow business, or they should learn a skill and start building a startup as a founder?
I think cash is the king. Doesn't matter whether you are building a scalable business or a normal business. Even if it comes from like a lot of businesses right now are very successful who come from tier two, tier three cities, and because the reason is there is a scarcity. Right here, you have 10 minutes, you got all your food. Uh, you know, immediately you get your phone recharged, your money get from person A, person B to B. But people who do not have that access, they still have those aspirations. And if someone can go and build that, like a healthcare access, or sanitization access, or mental health access, nutrition, food access, education to the last mile, logistics to the last mile, if these businesses can be built in tier 2, tier 3, I think that will be change the game.
So I've heard that there are many founders who have like 200 CR, 300 CR valuation of a company, but all their money is paper money and they do not have any real cash. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, if you see the crypto model, that's also one of that, right? You have virtual money available. Valuation is the future, what you are going to take an exit, and you are basically betting and building that business. Yes, that's true.
So many people do get funding. I
Yeah.
mean, they would get either seed or series A, B funding, but many of them fail. So according to you, What is the percentage of founders that fail even after getting funding?
I think it's 62 or 63%, something like that. I've not checked the recent data, but I think 2 months back I checked it. That is what the percent
Even
is.
after getting funding,
It is even
70%
after.
fail.
So it is 99% actually fell within 3 years. 92% fell within 1 year, and then 62 something fell after getting the pre-seed and seed round. If they get cleared the seed round, they go for Series A. I think that still 50 some percent actually fell after that.
So what we see is just 3 to 5% of the total founders who have like taken the bet.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do incubator and accelerators actually profit from investing into startups?
Mostly incubators actually very much focused on grant money, they get it from the government. That is one source of revenue. The second, they try to get an equity from the founders by giving them co-working space, or say for example access to all these services, meant some level of institutional funding they have. So that is the one way of getting money. Mostly VCs want to 10x, 15x, 20x their money from, they bet on 10 founders, one success, then they get the exit. So that's how they make money. So they know, they already mentally prepared ki, okay, out of 10 probably 7 will fail, but those 3, and out of that 3, if they take an exit from one which is a IPO or success, then that's where they make the money. And honestly, I think India has a lot of opportunity right now. We have a massive 1.4 billion population. So if we put like at least 10% of that, entrepreneurs needs to be there. And each entrepreneur, if they create 10 jobs, because it's very difficult to get or ask the government to create job, because they cannot create this. So only source of creating jobs is creating private enterprises or entrepreneurs. So I would say ki, we should have at least, I don't know, I mean maybe that would be too ambitious to say right now, but each district should have at least, say for example, 100 entrepreneurs, and then we can actually scale that in India, saying okay, we are the world's third largest entrepreneurship ecosystem. We can say okay, we are now the world's second largest, or on the world's first. So entrepreneurship should not be marketized in a way that it's a product, but it should be actually created a frame. I mean, India should create a framework for entrepreneurship like Japan has, or UK has, US has. So that sort of framework needs to be created in India.
According to you, how would you describe Indian startup ecosystem, and is this the right time to start a startup or anything?
Yes, I think, see, India, as I said, it's the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. There are a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs who want to build a product. Some of them have already gone global right now. So there is an opportunity. It's there. Now the thing is, ki, how do you basically see where the support system is? Because I've seen entrepreneurship at a very early stage in UK when the startup Britain started in 2007, while in India the startup India started in 2016. 14 somehow it got, see, I mean, at a very early stage. 16 was on almost official, it got announced and stuff. Startup US was before that. So if you see the startup nations around the world, so India is still like just catching up there key and 10, 15, 12 years. So I think India, from startup India, needs to be also more structured. And if you see right now startup India, the support system, it has not gone to the grassroots level yet. The startup India is almost like mission driven with different startup states, like startup Gujarat, startup UP, startup Assam. So it is there. But I would really like to see, take a district name and there is a startup mission there, so that we can actually decentralize startup India. And with startup India, I think Invest India also needs to work hand in hand, not only for the large projects and the public private projects, PPPs, but also supporting entrepreneurs, building the rural livelihood. And that is where I think the startups can reach. I mean, it can be scaled up.
So, according to you, what is the mindset and perspectives of Indian consumers?
See, Indian consumer are looking for more. I mean, I would say ki they want services quickly. They want last mile delivery services as well, and it's also now. I think most of the Indian consumers in a position to pay for it. 10 years back, if you would ask, then a lot of people couldn't afford it, or even if they want to afford, they want to do something else. But like there was a trend when any foreign goods and services coming, people have aspirations to that than something which was made in India. But right now that mindset has been already changed. A lot of people want to actually use the services or products which actually made in India. So and they can afford it. They have that, the flexibility of money, liquidity with them, so they can spend it. So I think, yeah, from the consumer side, they are prepared now. The production or the supply side, I think people need to little bit innovate, look into how to simplify it, not too much complicate in the process, and then build the products accordingly.
If someone's starting their business for the first time, what should they go for? Product business or service business?
While start with the service business because it doesn't require a lot of money. Product business always requires money from the day one itself because you have to manufacture, give the contract, packaging, a lot of things come into picture. But while building service, try to build some product which could be a tech product as well, and then align it with the physical manufacturing product.
So earlier, MVP used to be enough for getting funding or even pitching. But nowadays, the market has shifted. Investors not only demand MVP but also paying customers. So,
Yeah,
what is
paid
your take on
customers.
that?
I think it's going. See, it's going to be mature day by day, right? And earlier there was money available. There was very few entrepreneurs. Access to funds were pretty straightforward. But now investors have burnt their money. They have burnt their fingers. So they want to be very sure that if I'm investing in someone, I need to get X. So that's why they need that paid customer validation. And I think that's also a right way of doing it because then a lot of companies, like big companies, like whether I don't want obviously want to take the name, but if you see, a lot of companies are made raised billions of dollar and now they are running in losses, right? And that's not good. Okay, valuation wise they are in a very great position, they can have a great exit, but are the founders ready to take an exit when the investors want to take the exit? So if they want to run this business like this for next 20 years or 30 years, then you will create loss making businesses than actually profit making. So that is where I think you need to make product.
And that's all. I would like to thank Mr. Dev for coming to the Hidden Grid. And I strongly believe that this podcast will benefit many startup founders and youngsters. And if anyone wants to join your accelerator program, so they can contact you. Anything you want me to mention?
We are available mostly online. They can find us on LinkedIn. They can find us on Instagram and stuff. Other than that, I mean, we do have the website nebulaaccelerator.com or globalbharatfund.com if they're raising money. So, yes.